All right. Hi, welcome to the Chaos University Work Group meeting. Claire, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Once again, eggs are very important in the cooking process. No, I won't go there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
well, okay. Two things. First of all, I wanted to highlight the write-up of the CHAOSS academic open source working group meeting workshop that was held in Brussels that Regina has created. So
Yeah.
I put a link in the Slack to that. I think she did a great overview of all the topics covered. David was there. Hi, David. And just for people to have a look through that because I think it was a very interesting discussion. And it covered, I mean, if I had to give a really, really simplistic overview, there was a lot of discussion about metrics that came down to it's important to have citations for researchers. That's what they care about most. And how do we make that happen? That was one conversation. And then the second conversation was all about how might you use open source to have resilience of your research outputs in a time of funding uncertainty. And so there was a discussion about that too. So they were two really interesting discussions. So I just want to point people to both of those. Um, but I do also have a topic that is very, I suppose, it's a hot topic here in Ireland, and I was interested. I wanted to see if other people would be interested in it because it's something that I'm going to be looking at, and that is around the context of the Global Innovation Index. And I don't know if many of you have heard of the Global Innovation Index, but it was
No, but I
apparently.
could make that number up for you if you need me
Oh
to.
yeah, yeah. Well, apparently people have been working on this. So this is a metric that has been referenced in a lot of Ireland's research strategy documents, and Ireland is undergoing a national rejig of its entire research R&D spend. I know some other countries may be going through a similar process. Yeah. So I suppose my thought is that in the context of everything that's going on around research investment, um, there is there's kind of a train of thought where that you can go down the pathway of looking at what goals, questions, and metrics researchers care about and the ecosystem cares about in terms of open source projects and why they're valuable and what value it creates for the individual. Um, and I suppose my thought is there's also a conversation about how research outputs are important for the institution, the country, and I'm wondering in the current climate if it might be interesting for us to do a little bit of thinking around that side of things, as opposed to not think about the researcher citations, individual motivation side of things, but just in the current climate, I was thinking, would it be nice to actually have something that does align the work in academic open source to some goals, questions, metrics that are being looked at from an international measurement of innovation? Because I feel that demonstrating a tie there, that there might be metrics that answer questions that go to a global innovation metric that might be important, could potentially be a useful thing for anyone working in this space. So that's my suggestion and question. Would people be interested in that? Because it certainly would be very useful for us in Ireland as we go into this. Why the hell would we do this? Oh, here's why. You want to do the Global Innovation Index. Here's how open source directly relates to that. That's my pitch.
Yeah, comments.
Do you want to be snarky?
We
My snarky response is
are subject to the code of conduct.
yeah.
Within the code of conduct, be as
Yeah.
snarky as you like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that in the United States we're paying close attention to metrics right now. At least our leadership. I worry about that. I so open source metrics in innovation, I think, is something that is interesting to several people. Um, and I think OSI, Deb from OSI kind of talked about that when we met at OFAI in DC. And then Frank Nagel, I think, is the guy at Harvard working on this. Um, So I think that there is interest in understanding open source AI, open source software and innovation. Personally, I'm interested. Innovation study is my area of interest. So I think I think yes, and I also think there's probably money out there for this to study it. So I'd love to help you organize and think. Yeah.
So Claire or Angela, if you're familiar with this, could you like give me some perspective on what this index is?
I popped the
So,
link
oh,
to
sorry.
it in
Okay.
your in the chat. Um, well, Claire, go ahead. And I would say that Michael, since you're here, actually, this is really good because Michael has been working. The next step in his project here at UT is to take our discovery process and turn it into a linking process where we talk about how far open source software travels, and in that
Sure.
regard, come back to an innovation question.
Okay.
The innovation question here, though, I think is related to GDP specifically. Um, so go ahead, Claire. I didn't mean to walk over that.
No, and look, I know little detail about it. So I came across this index, as I said, in the context of our national innovation strategy. So it's peppered throughout the document, as in we care about how Ireland shows up on the Global Innovation Index. And I was like, what the hell is this Global Innovation Index? So I asked ChatGPT. So I'm going to put a big kind of I asked ChatGPT star beside this. This may or may not be the truth. They may have been hallucinating. But according to ChatGPT, this was actually came out of work that was done by NCAD in 2007.
Yeah.
And it was then moved to a number of different like kind of research organizations. It's, I believe now kind of mostly maintained by the World Intellectual Property Organization, which gives you a little bit of a clue as to its leanings in terms of where it's actually focused and the kinds of things it can look at are like the inputs to an innovation system and then the outputs. But the outputs that they currently focus on are to some degree, you know, related to IP licensing and the traditional routes for technology transfer and commercialization. And, you know, very much with the IP organization, technology transfer profession. But there are, even through my initial like investigations, there are some examples of things that one would absolutely say, yes, there's loads of examples of this in open source. For example, they count things like collaborations. Now, I don't know what exactly counts as a collaboration, but they would count things like an industry researcher collaboration. And certainly in Europe, there are more examples of those sorts of collaborations happening through with an open source output as a mandated output, which would for me be a very particular angle to look at. So I suppose for me, like part of this work would be to find out exactly what it is that the Global Innovation Index looks at, look at who's measuring it, how it is measured, and then to think about the idea of if that's a goal, which it seems to be through some national strategies. Maybe it is at an institution level for some institutions, just identifying where that is a goal and then looking at the questions that they ask and what those questions are in the context of open source. What should those questions be? And then the metrics that might be in place to deliver proof of those goals. Then for me, that would be something that I feel in today's climate might be, as I said, useful rather than, for example, and please, David, don't I like the kind of the goal of delivering SDGs is something I emphasize quite a lot from a personal motivation perspective. I just feel in the current climate, it's not necessarily as useful to be a justification for funding, for example, or a justification for activity in the space. So I'm just wondering if we should balance both together and use this as maybe a lever to justify. I'm very fearful that the current climate would lead people to think that open source work is just kind of for the global good. And knowing the current trajectory of funding that's for the global good, I would be very keen to also make the case that it's for hard-nosed capitalist reasons. Though that makes me, you know, I'm not, you know what I'm saying, right?
Claire,
I
you're
think
in
David.
luck. You're in luck. SDG 9 is industry innovation and infrastructure.
There we
So
go. There we go.
UN SDGs got you covered.
Thank you. There's one for everyone in the audience.
So there's also a national security argument here, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at like the whole of society approach, where you say if you build out, these certain sectors, and innovation in these sectors is important because it all contributes to a larger national security picture. It's there's lots of ways to make this to crack that nut.
Yeah.
So, but it's proposing that we specifically focus on this maybe for a couple of weeks, just find out what it is, find out who knows about it, find out how it's measured, think about open source in that context.
Yeah, my husband is an economist, and I think he would love to work on this, with us on this, I should say.
Just signed him up for something.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
he's in the other room. He can hear me.
Okay.
I've-
So as long as you're not ripped out of the meeting.
Yeah.
The hook.
No, yeah, he and Deb have actually met and talked about this, and then we've talked about pulling together a grant on this on our campus. We were actually looking at a DoD grant that no longer exists as of last week, but I think there's private foundations that would be interested in thinking about this as well. So I think he's an economist who studies what's called whole of society, and whole of society is paying attention to SGDs, economy, innovation as part of national security. So that's why I made that comment, but I think he could add a real quantitative economist approach to looking at innovation, like you're suggesting is important in capitalism, which it very much is, for better, for worse.
I have a question for people that y'all can help me with. So I really struggle personally with, like, we produce some piece of open source software, and then we want to make the claim that that piece of open source software, like, helps innovation, or is, in this case, maybe improves national security. Like, that gap between those two things is so enormous to me. I don't know how to overcome that. And so I'm sure that's just my own personal training.
You're suggesting you don't see how, oh, sorry.
No, I don't. I see that you would want to do it, and I'm guessing there are ways to do it. I don't know what those are. So, like, even like the way that the group is looking at, say, the SDGs, and how open source the UN SDGs, and how open source may play an impact on, like, moving some of those SDGs, like, the gap between those two things is just so immense sometimes. It's like a cavern for me. So, like, if I kick a ball and the ball goes forward, like, I understand that relationship. Like, that's an easy one. That's really close. This one seems like it has such a distance that I would need a lot of help to overcome that gap. And so, Sean, you had a comment. Claire,
I think my comment is that I look at security and innovation as tensions on the system, that they aren't pulling in opposite directions, but they're pulling again, they're not entirely pulling together either. So there's trade-offs. Building a secure infrastructure is different than a highly innovative work stream. Sometimes. That's just how I see it. But
yeah.
I yield.
Yeah, Claire. I suppose from my perspective, this is one of the reasons why I am proposing that we explore the Global Innovation Index, because they have literally defined the metrics that they think makes that connection. So they literally have a set of metrics that they're saying, if your goal is innovation, here are the metrics. And my suggestion is that we look at those metrics and say, well, where does open source, how is open source showing up in those metrics? Because are they, and where could we look to see if they're not where they should, or anything like that? Because my suspicion is that the systems that have emerged to actually measure the things that matter for the Global Innovation Index is very much predicated on them being IP licensing and through the traditional mechanisms for an institution. And so the idea here would be, well, say, for example, if we are already doing discovery work looking for open source projects, maybe we need to look for other aspects of those open source projects. I can tell you right now that if you can see contributors from multiple organizations, some from universities and some from corporate industry, and you have that as an indicator, an attribute of an open source project, that will immediately count for the Global Innovation Index. But the question is that counting? Is someone tracking that for that institution? As an example. But the work about making the link, my understanding is that that's been done. But again, we should look at that to see how that's been done.
My guess is that it's a basic econometric equation.
Yeah.
So that's my guess. So it's a basic, social science statistical equation where they've put in a likelihood model or an estimator where they've said, if you have, these certain things and you move these certain things on this, scale over here, then, you run your minimax equation and boom, you get better outputs. That's my guess. What they're
better
doing.
innovation, at least in this case, or more contribution to innovation. So is the goal to take a look at like open source writ large, or is it to be able to track like individual projects through this?
I don't even know what they're tracking. So I suppose my ask is that we might look at what the Global Innovation Index, what their goals, questions, and metrics are, and then think about that in the context of open source. That's as a starting
definitely
point.
not pushing back, Claire. I'm just like thinking.
Oh no.
No.
That's like, that's as
These
much
are
as I
all
know.
good questions.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Because because I feel like that's sometimes what the Linux Foundation does, is they make these arguments about open source like at large. They say that open source is contributing like $1 billion trillion to the economy. And I feel like that's some of those things that like Frank Nagel has done on those census reports, where it's not necessarily tracking individual projects. It's just like this whole thing called open source is just really
Yeah.
Sorry.
no,
broad spectrum indicators are hard. So
okay, right. But if we could get it down to that local level, I feel like that would be the local level, meaning like project by project, or even collections of projects by collections of projects. That would probably have a little bit more oomph to it, particularly at the university level.
That's what I was thinking of. So when sorry, and that's the context of the way I was thinking about it in my brain. I was like, the very specific thing is, if at an institution level, or these things are rolled up by institution to a national level, but where at a project level,
Right.
do they map to this metric? And if so, where do they map? First of all, like, is there any way that we can actually demonstrate that such and such a project is an example of this, first of all? And then secondly, how do we track that? How do we even measure that? Like, is there a tool to help us identify these projects? Or can we fold in that ask into the work that's been doing to discover open source projects? Because to the best of my knowledge, it's not currently there. And then lastly, how do you even provide those kinds of insights at an institutional level, at a regional level, at a country level? So it's those three level of questions that I was curious about. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no, I think this sounds interesting. Do you have, Claire, do you know where those metrics are? They're somewhere
I have the information that Angela just shared, and what ChatGPT thinks. And what I was hoping to do, I've got a link into the folks in the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. I know someone who knows someone there. So my thought was to actually get them to have a talk about, this is what the Global Innovation Index is, and this is, to actually have a chat with us about that as a starting point. And then potentially for us to do some exploration ourselves to say, this is what we think it is. Let's check that with someone, and then move from there. That would be a starting point for me.
That'd be great. That's funny that when Angela first posted this, I read it as Wipro, like the consulting company.
Yeah. That's why I think WIPO, but WIPO. I can't imagine they want to be called WIPO. That doesn't sound like a sexy acronym.
Not sure WIPO is any better.
No, I know. I'm working on this. I'm like, it's just like, what are they thinking?
WIPO. Maybe the French pronunciation would be WIPO.
WIPO.
I see there were a couple things put in chat. Michael, Angela had said you're kind of doing some of this stuff in like trying to make those connections.
Yeah, so I'm really glad that I'm here today to listen on this conversation because, yeah, I mean, everything that's being talked about is something that has always been part of the vision for what, we've been working on, which I know I've talked about a few times with this group, with our institutional innovation grapher, where we're finally at the stage where I think we feel pretty comfortable with the projects we're identifying at the institutional level. And then the next step we've always envisioned would be to see who is contributing to these projects that are coming out of UT Austin. And Claire, to your point, I think it would be fascinating to look and see, do we have any folks that are in industry contributing to these projects? Who's contributing to them from other institutions? How much internal collaboration within the UT Austin community do we see? And the idea of tracking this at the project level, I think, would be fascinating, because one of the things that we've already done with the accounts that we've identified on GitHub is seeing who's most active in our community. I can imagine we could do something similar at the project level, where we could say, okay, which projects have the most external contributors, which ones have the most external contributors from industry. And I think it would also be fascinating to track that change over time. So, maybe right now we have certain projects that, rank highly in whatever metrics we might utilize, but how does that change from year to year? Do we see, a new project really, taking off, and maybe another project is, at a level where it's very mature, and maybe now we're starting to see folks migrate to some alternative solution instead. So yeah, I think it would be really fascinating to look at that as a next step for us.
And as we are talking about, like, North Stars about where we might be going, if I'm thinking about this, like, I'd be like very interested to understand how even those projects align to certain things like domains. So for example, and this is again something that I never even thought of until I thought of how it shows up in our national innovation strategy. Because, for example, in Ireland, they have different investment strategies depending on whether it is health related, energy related, climate related, whatever. And that's not something I've ever seen us talk about from a metric perspective, but I have a feeling that when we start rolling these things up as an innovation metric, then you could almost see certain regions or countries say, we want a program that explicitly is looking at the sustainability of the supply chain in this particular vertical. What are the projects? Where is this innovation already happening? Yada, yada. And then you could potentially even build a justification for maintenance and sustainability of things that are in the dependency tree for a given innovation area. That's a high priority. And so I love that idea too, but I'd never even thought about that kind of filter on the work that's happening around open source, because I was thinking about it from the individual perspective, not from this broader impact perspective. Yeah, and Sean, this was my original thought process too, that this has all been taken over by the people whose only measure of success is an IP license, and knowing that that's such a tiny proportion of all the research, like that, the
Right.
tiniest proportion of research outputs count in metrics like this. But actually, when you dig into the report, there's a lot more different types of things that they say they're looking at, question are they, but they say they're looking at that are not this, even though your original
Good.
look would be, yeah. So like I said,
Good.
an example was that one of the things that was referenced was industry academic collaborations. Now, that doesn't mean that there has to be an IP license to measure that. So the question is, well, I don't know. So the question would be that if that's your theory, then it shouldn't be that there's an IP license that has to be in place to demonstrate the fact that this innovation and collaboration is happening. If we can make that case, then perhaps there is that's exactly my point. You could even if they're not measuring that, you could have a mirror, something that measures that, and kind of present this and kind of go, you say you're looking for this, but you're only picking out a tiny proportion of these examples. Here's another set of lists, and here are the stories we have to justify that. So, that's the kind of thing I was thinking of. Yeah.
No, and I mean, open source kind of operates in a opposite of patent oriented environment. So showing the value, I think, that's obviously an interesting topic.
Well, and I think just because this is all Sloan funded, and from like the Sloan perspective, anything that increases like speed to science, or time to science, or speed to innovation, or time to innovation is really important in the innovation process. So even figuring out some of those things that help speed up the scientific process, and reproducibility, which is key to open source software, is one of those elements. it's going to become super important in open AI and open source AI as that matures as a field. Being able to actually employ it in a way that it's reproducible so that it can increase speed to science and increase speed to innovation. These are all going to be important discussions. Whether we map completely to the Global Innovation Index or whether we look at the Global Innovation Index as a guide and then create something corollary, I think.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's exciting.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Claire, it sounds like I agree. Like whether we map to the index or something that is derived from that index is pretty cool. And then Claire, just a comment to like, it seems like the first step might be kind of talking to what Michael had presented, like given given a landscape of known projects, just individual projects within a university, like what are questions we could ask against those individual projects that might give us an indication that they're actually helping innovation? And then to Angel's point, whether it's against that index or something similar to that index. It seems like a secondary question would be the supply chains question, where we could, like, where we're actually looking at connections or relationships of projects. That's a kind of a heavier project or a heavier question, I think. It might be easier just to look at it project by project, just to start.
Yeah,
But
that was more like, you know, if we got really good at this.
yeah, like phase. Well, once you can map the individual projects and you can see their dependency networks, then you could, in theory, kind of take a look at those networks. Michael, I guess a question.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Claire.
Well, no, so I know so little about the details of this. I mean, so I was planning to do this anyway, like where we need to find out for Ireland, because if we have a hope of trying to embed ourselves in whatever the funding flow is for innovation in Ireland, we need to be able to address this. So if folks are interested, I'm exploring trying to get a presentation on what is the Global Innovation Index, what are they measuring, how are they measuring it. If folks are interested, I'll try and get it for this call. I'll schedule it for a time period here, and even if we can't get it in the short term in the next 2 weeks, say, we can maybe have a look at what's there and just see what we know and what we don't know, or create a set of questions even around that. That would be a proposal.
My take is there's interest listening to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Claire, do you have access to like student people who could help us with like data? Or let me just say, and I'll speak preliminarily here. This is something that Michael and I have been talking about and really thinking about. And James Howison on our campus has come up with this really comprehensive database of citations. And his goal with that group of researchers is to do some of this work, to really tie it back to sort of like these innovation chains and see the value proposition. And his goal is so that people can go and make the argument during a tenure process that open source software development is as important as a citation or a publication, right? So his goal is not this large economic thing, but his indicators will be similar. And he actually has a couple of students that are working around this area that might be useful and helpful. So I'd like to, like, I think if we're going to do this, we are going to need like feet on the ground. We're going to need to think through, you know, the process, all that kind of stuff. But I'll offer that I think at our institution we have enough interest and enough people that we can say we would love to be an anchor partner in this. I don't know that we can address Ireland specifically because, but happy to do whatever.
For me, a lot of the discussion, or even showing that this is happening elsewhere, would help Ireland. So it's not, you know, it's really, for me, I don't think anyone has explored this Global Innovation Index with this lens. And for me, that's, even just doing that would be very helpful, because it allows us to create a narrative that links the two, which is the first point. And then secondly, even if we can't do it for Ireland, at least we can point and say it's being done elsewhere. We should do it for Ireland, and that would be another win. So that would be, so just to say 100% on what you're suggesting.
all right. I think this sounds fun. I think there's a lot of interest here.
Okay, well, I will go and hit up my my chain of people who said they know someone in the WIPO
Not Wippo.
And
organization, and we will at least find out how they pronounce their acronym.
That'll be the first question. What do you call yourself? Angela, I could invite James to this as well, to have him give an overview of the work he's been doing, if you
Yeah.
think that might be useful.
Yeah, great. I think that would be great. James, do you know James?
Yeah, real
Yeah.
well.
Okay.
yeah, Matt and James and I and a few other people just published a paper.
Oh, okay. So I didn't know who all was
Yeah.
on the paper. I've
Yeah.
only seen I
I've-
went to a conference with James and
Oh,
and
not
Yeah.
his not his site as
Not
paper. It was a
not the
different
site
paper.
as paper. It's a different paper, but
okay.
yeah, I've known James for almost 20 years now. So yeah.
I often have beer with him when I'm in Austin.
Yeah.
So in the
Oh,
middle
good.
in the middle of the day.
In the middle of the day. Yeah,
Is that
those
an Austin thing or
Australian-
a James thing? I'm just curious now. It's like
It's both. It is both.
It is definitely an Austin thing. I can guarantee that.
although I can't do it because I'd have to take a nap later. But James is from Australia, so he's a little, you know.
Here for breakfast is more normal. Yeah.
That would be great. And then I am kind of curious on this conversation too. Michael, I mean, it sounds like you've kind of done well at UT to like kind of map the state of open source projects that are coming from the university. Is that right?
I think we have a pretty clear vision of what we want to do. The
Okay.
progress has been a little bit slower than I would have hoped just because of time constraints. But yeah, I think we have a really great vision, that's been very much informed by some of these discussions that, we've had in this group as well. I mean,
Okay.
so many great ideas coming out of this. But yeah, I mean, we do have a data set that now that we are using and we posted on our website and that folks can look at. And yeah, we just want to continue building from there.
Okay. I mean, I'm wondering, would it make sense to kind of work, if we're going to work through a worked example of this, like work from something that you might have at UT? I don't know kind of what your position is on sharing some of that info or what, but it might be nice to kind of look at a worked example of project that you have a sense might have some sort of broader impact beyond just the project itself. I'm sure you kind of know a little bit. Oh, looks like you're sharing it right there. So
yeah, so this
Okay.
is the link that you can visit on our website to see this list of projects. And so
Okay.
right now the functionality is pretty limited. It's an interactive table that you can sort.
Yep.
So we want to add filtering, searching functionality, ways to browse that, and then we are also planning to share that data so that folks can download it as a CSV as well. So we just want to. We had a great conversation, I don't know, about 6 months ago where we talked about some of the privacy issues. I don't know if y'all remember that conversation, but that gave us a little bit of pause where we want to make sure we're approaching this in the right way, right? So like this list that you see if you go to that link is for just the repository. So we didn't share the account information that we've also collected. Again, it's all publicly available, but I know that there were some concerns voiced in this group, and we want to be conscious of taking slow steps so we're not once something's out in the world, it's out in the world, and want to manage that carefully.
Okay, that's really cool. It might be. Yeah, I see. It's a big table, 8,500 rows. It's a lot.
Let me add something
You could
here.
just do that
So
analysis while we're sitting here, Matt. That would be great.
Yeah.
let me add something. Just this is for I think that the work that Michael has done, as you all look at it, is really technical, and I think we go forward in a very technical vein, and I think that that's really important that we get all the technical stuff correct. What I do want to offer, I'm a social scientist. My PhD is in public policy. I'm a quantitative social scientist, which means I can do the math as well. So Claire, your arguments about how this has to grow into something and mirror and then translate into national policy, I hear loudly and clearly. And I want you to know that I think we can do the academic argument and talk about tenure, and we can do just the open source software sort of value proposition for the OSS community, but then I also think we can echo it up to that national level. And I think even with the people in this room, we have the power to do that really technically well and in a rigorous way. If that echoes with everyone, I think we have enough skilled people that we can sort of separate out talents and figure that out. As long as everybody's kind of okay with that local, broad, national kind of picture.
Claire said it sounds powerful. I think it sounds awesome. I think it would be a lot of fun to kind of work on this together as a group here.
Powerful and fun is the best.
Yeah. Well, that sounds great. Okay, well, maybe a few of the next steps are Claire, like mentioned, trying to reach out to somebody to maybe give us an overview of the index, so we could just kind of ask some pointed questions about it. I think that would be super helpful.
Actually, I'm thinking that because if we're meeting in 2 weeks' time, it might be interesting for us to create a set of questions first. Then we get them to come and we can ask them questions. So maybe we'll have a little look and say, this is what we think it is. Let's get our questions first. So we're not doing that live with a guest speaker.
Sure.
That might be a good
Why don't I,
order.
yeah, to that end, I can start just a shared doc and put it in the Slack channel if you want to do that.
I want to second that. Like, you don't need to have someone come on to give them a download of the questions you had after reading the Wikipedia article. So I feel like, I shouldn't have gone off mute because that was nonsensical. I try so hard to wake up at this time of day and be functional, and I'm just not. Read the Wikipedia article first, then make up the question. So let's make a doc where we can put those questions in, and then we can have someone talk about them. And the other reason I went off mute is that another good person to think about talking about these questions with would be Frank Nagel, if you haven't thought of reaching out to him yet. So that would be something that I would suggest.
Reaching out to Frank? Can I do that? I have a selfish interest in that. And if you would hit James, I think it would be, yeah, okay, thanks. Sorry. And then if you would reach out to James, I dog James a lot about like, hey, you should come and play with us. And he's always like, yeah, I should. And he invites me to everything that he does. And I think it would be, his office is like literally downstairs from mine. But I think it would be more powerful coming from you. Because I talk to him about everything under the sun, and it might just get lost in all the things that we talk about.
Okay, so the idea would just be to, I think, for James, just to invite him and kind of give an overview of what he's working on and kind of what his hopes are. That would be kind of how I would approach it with James.
And with Frank, same way, or
yeah, I think that would be great. Just talk about how just the work he's doing. Apparently he's doing kind of things on the economic side.
Yeah.
Just kind of give us an overview of kind of where he's at as well.
Yeah, and I think one of James's students, Hannah, is actually working with Frank Nagel's team.
Yeah.
So we might invite her as well, just to round out the team.
I learned that that's the second student he had named Hannah.
Yeah, it is.
Oh.
Yeah.
So,
not at all confusing.
No. Right in a row. Okay, no, that sounds great. Well, why don't we just plan on that? I think we have a few action items here. So Angela to reach out to Frank, Claire to reach out to somebody at WIPO, and me to reach out to James and maybe Hannah, and kind of just keep this conversation going. And I'll start that document too for a series of shared questions that we might have. Good.
There's a fourth action item that should probably be done, which is just get a Zenodo, I think it's Zenodo, Zotero folder up and look for all the papers that mention open source in this index, just to see if there's anything that we've missed, because it's always possible that we've missed a couple of things that have been in the research where people have looked at this already. And so having someone do that, I think, would be useful. I'm happy to take a stab at that.
I was just going to ask you, do you want to start that, Richard? So thank you.
How should I share that? Just put it in this doc, or
yeah, that'd be it, right in the minutes. If you look at the top of page 2, I should put page numbers on here, but top of page 2.
Cool. Okay. David Perez Suarez. I'm not sure I know you very much. I'm Richard Littauer. I work with Claire a lot on Curious and on Sustain. And I'm in New Zealand, which is why like I'm really groggy. And I woke up early and figured I would just sit on this call and just not talk. So that's why I know everyone else, and that's why I've been really, really familiar. But normally I'm a very formal person. So good morning.
Great.
Good morning to you.
You got a good morning, Richard. So, all right. Was there anything in the chat that I missed? Because it looked like there were a few things that kind of scrolled past, and I just want to make sure that there's nothing in that chat that was missed. Claire, I saw you had posted a few things. Was there anything you wanted to highlight?
Well, only that I have already created a group library for open source advocacy where I'd put in value and economic impact. So we can maybe use that as the folder to put things in, because I'm trying to, that would be very helpful. So I'll send that around as well.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind. It's already a shared folder in Zotero.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. I'll just figure out how to get the link.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Good.
I have an announcement. I don't know if you all saw the Sustain event that's happening next week on Friday. It's like a 3-hour event. That's going to be virtual. It's going to be a forum to talk about the normal things that Sustain talks about, which is what are we doing and how do we keep open source going? So I can drop a link in here. It's nominally free. If you want to donate, it's always nice, but you know, that's how it goes. And it's just there. I know that we have a clash with one of the Curious calls, but that's at the last hour. So if you're able to come, I think it might be worth it. I know Claire's going to come and then drop off. It's not ideal. I shouldn't be saying that as an organizer, but I have conflicting commitments, I guess. So, but yeah, just check this out and make it if you can. I emailed a few people last night, and yeah, just want to make sure you know.
All right. Thanks for sharing, Richard.
I'm also looking for, if anyone has any suggestions for the podcast, for the Sustain OSS podcast, I would love to talk to another academic for this month. So if anyone thinks that there's someone who's really good to talk to about the state of open source in the world and how we can do better from an academic perspective, throw me a name. If you haven't been on the podcast recently and you're just eager to talk to people, throw me your name. I don't know. Here's my email.
David just did a huge project with the UN or in prep for the UN hackathon, and did a really good presentation this morning on kind of state of open source and hackathons and SDGs.
Okay, I'm happy to have
Cool.
David.
And so this is a tinier world, but it was a great presentation. Or it was a great talk.
Dave. Great. It's just talking to me for an hour. It's not a big ask now.
Richard, have you ever talked to, speaking of David, I know David, you were working with Remy. Have you ever talked to Remy on your podcasts?
Maker, I think so.
Okay.
I should
Yeah,
check.
he's very insightful too when it comes to the state of open source in the world.
Remy's amazing. Richard, I'm happy to talk to you anytime. I don't feel qualified, so that's why I was. And I'm
Great,
also
that means you're qualified. That's good.
It's kind of the measure of qualified these days.
Admitting you're not qualified.
That's right. Yeah.
No,
At
not
least I know
admitting it.
Oh, exactly.
We haven't.
I
had
wouldn't say
Remy
admitting it. Let's not go too far here.
on.
All right, very good. All right, everybody. Well, honestly, thank you so much. And Claire, thank you for bringing up this topic. It seemed to resonate with a lot of people, meaning everybody. So very good. All right, well, have a good rest of your day, everybody, and we'll talk soon, okay? Take care.